the cops held a press conference down in Georgia to ostensibly give the facts of the massacre of 8 people by a murderer. 6 of those 8 people were Asian. Fox News is continuing to try to downplay the racial element of this. And the cops, who are supposedly going to be a part of the investigation of this murderer and prosecution of him, are downplaying it in a different way.
With investigators, they interviewed him this morning, and they got that impression that, yes, he understood the gravity of it, and he was pretty much fed up and kind of at the end of his rope, and yesterday was a really bad day for him, and this is what he did.
Remorseful?
I'm not going to go to, I don't know if he was remorseful or not.
He's a pretty young guy with years.
A really bad day for him. Now, that cop, you'll be surprised to know, if we have this BuzzFeed article, may have shared similar racist views that would have allowed him to give this murderer the benefit of the doubt.
Yeah, this is from a Facebook post, allegedly from a profile belonging to this police officer.
He says, "Love my shirt, get yours while they last." And it says COVID-19 on the shirt, imported virus from China. I don't know why it's spelled incorrectly, but
it's how Trump pronounces China. China.
Cool. So that's another way to connect the hatred and racism that Trump stowed to what we've been seeing. But as Matt brought up with that article, which I actually hadn't seen, one of the witnesses to the shooting said that the shooter expressed that he was explicitly targeting Asians. So anyway, this does smell like a hate crime, obviously, to anybody who's paying attention. But according to the cops there, it was just a bad day.
Play it again. Like, I don't know how you hire, the cop that goes to speak to these people. If this is, was this the sheriff or whatever, but like, it's all poetry and like, play it again. Cause it's all like his metaphors. Listen close to the metaphors. The end of the rope is a particularly interesting one to use.
With investigators, they interviewed him this morning, and they got that impression that, yes, he understood the gravity of it, and he was pretty much fed up and kind of at the end of his rope, and yesterday was a really bad day for him, and this is what he did.
End of his rope is, Matt, that's such a good point. That's such a good point, because it's like, what other option did he have than to murder those 8 people and those Asian women who worked at these massage parlors? Like,
we're all really sick and tired of this pandemic. You have to understand, That's what I feel like. That's what he's like.
Also,
no, I totally get it. It's so,
he understood the gravity of the situation. What is that? What is how do you measure the gravity a situation has? Like, what the fuck are you talking about? Like, it's like post-game press conference sports, like, jargon, honestly.
Right.
Yeah, we understood that this is a big game for us. The Bears were the Bears, whatever. Like, it's like they're talking around the fact that 8 people lost their lives.
It's not even that they're talking around it. He's expressing sympathy for the fact that this guy snapped, really, at the end of it. Like, he's like, listen, he's someone I can empathize with.
Listen, if he'd thrown in, we've all been there, done that, after everything that he just said, I mean, like, it totally would not have sounded out of place.
Yeah, we all had that. We all have that inclination sometimes, and he was just at the end of his rope.
Listen, if you saw someone who had a bad day taking out their frustration by punching in a wall, you would look at that person and still be like, well, that was weird. But apparently this guy going on a mass shooting rampage targeting Asian women specifically, it seems, that's just, it's what happens.
Yeah, it's even more disturbing to have it come from like a police sergeant or whatever, like a sheriff's deputy, where you're like, oh yeah, this guy who carries a gun all day is basically like thinking about the fact that, like, listen, I might just snap someday.
Now you guys totally understand where we were coming from over the summer with all those protests, I mean, that's really what
And
imagine
imagine how they treat sex workers that they catch in that area, right? Like basically he's trying to say, oh, you know, he was at the end of his rope. Like if they have that amount of a dehumanizing response to the victims, imagine how they treat busts of sex workers down in that area. It's probably with immense inhumanity and zero empathy at all.
I want to be careful here about that, actually, because we don't know what kind of what's going on.
No,
here at these
I don't mean to imply that. I just mean they took his explanation at face value. This was his reasoning. Like that's embedded in what they're discussing here.
But here's something I just got to add this because Emma brought it up, and it's something I read from someone on Twitter who's a religious reporter, and it was a great point that I honestly didn't even think of. Apparently, this shooter came from a very religious evangelical background. And it's important to understand in that context she was talking about. I wish I had her name. It was a great post. I'll look for it after I drop this and someone else talks. But she brought up that you have to understand that within that background, sex addiction means a very different thing. We could literally just be talking about a guy who had relations outside of marriage, and they would call that sex addiction. Like, it's not what people think when they hear the term sex addiction.
Yeah, this guy isn't David Duchovny, right? Like,
right.
He felt guilt about, pretty basic sex probably, or sex, like maybe if he had some kind of relationship with a sex worker.
This whole thing is just, listen, Asian attacks on Asian Americans have gone up 150% over this past year. If you can think of anything that happened over the past year that would suddenly cause that to happen, I mean, obviously Asian Americans have always faced racism in this country. This country has a long history of not just imposing their racist values on Asian Americans, but we also go over to Asian majority countries and impose our beliefs over there. I mean, the amount of pain we've caused the Asian community, is truly. I don't think people really have wrap their mind around the gravity of that situation. Let's put it that way. But the idea that this all happened in a vacuum, people are, and this is something that I saw some people go with, and it's just ridiculous. The idea that, you can't blame white supremacy on this. You can't blame that because, there's been attacks where people of, African-American people have attacked Asians and Hispanic people have attacked Asians. Well, yeah, sure. Okay. There is totally a problem all around of racism against Asian people, racism against all minority groups from other minority groups, but that's a completely separate conversation. We are talking about a white person who went on a mass shooting, not a black guy or a Hispanic guy or a Native American guy who just sucker punched somebody. We're talking about someone who went on a mass shooting, planned mass shooting, got in a car, drove 30 miles to another place to kill more Asian people. I mean, to bring that up, that completely separate conversation up now, I mean, it really shows where your priorities lie, right? It's not the situation at hand. It's the cap for the idea that white supremacy could possibly cover, I should say, for the idea that white supremacy could possibly have been what was behind a evangelical white man getting in his car, driving around, shooting people, and then having the wherewithal to say, oh, it was my sex addiction. I mean, he knows what he's doing. There's no laws in this country that'll give you a harsher sentence for doing a killing based on a sex addiction, but you'll certainly get a much harsher sentence if you did it based on race.
There's a documentary on Netflix on the Yorkshire Ripper, and the amazing thing about that case in the 70s in Yorkshire, England, is that the cops kept saying that the only women that were being targeted were prostitutes, they said. And so everybody assumed that, we don't have to actually be afraid because it's just those women that are being targeted, right? But it turned out that actually their assumptions about the women that were being targeted, they weren't actually sex workers at all. They were just women who had to, I mean, a few of them were, but not all of them, right? And so I don't know, that sort of, you don't trust cops when they bring in sex work and that sort of thing. They're like Emma said, if they aren't treating them brutally, they're probably shaking them down in some sort of awful relationship there too. So I don't know. Like I think it's definitely a gross thing to hear him talk
Absolutely. Absolutely. I don't trust any of what's going on here. There better be some sort of independent body getting their asses down to Atlanta to work on this. And then even then, I don't know how much I trust that unless there's someone who has experience. They should really be getting experts on non-law enforcement experts to guide this investigation with a federal agency here, because I don't trust it one bit. This is not good, I think, and it certainly doesn't look good for any future hate crimes that are going to occur targeting the Asian American community, which are certainly not going anywhere. Sadly, we're seeing there was another video just yesterday of a Asian, like an elderly Asian woman, 76 years old, was attacked in San Francisco, and she actually fought her attacker back. And the video shows that her attacker, a white guy, surprise,
we talked about this in our interview in the first hour, in our first interview.
Right, he was the one taken away on a stretcher. But at the same time, there was an interview with her later on that says how she's basically right now blinded in one of her eyes. It's horrible.